What if feeling tired or foggy isn't just part of getting older? My guest, Lindsey Clements, a functional nutrition and lifestyle coach, helps women uncover the real reasons behind fatigue and hormone imbalance, using practical strategies to bring the body back into balance. And if you've been doing all the right things, but still not seeing results, this episode is for you. So come join us. Women's Wellness Authority is your go-to podcast for discovering the hidden gems of holistic health and well-being. In each episode, we dive deep into the many layers of wellness, from mental and physical health to spiritual growth. Through insightful interviews with experts, healers, and thought leaders, we uncover alternative approaches, healing practices, and fresh perspectives that empower you to transform your life. Whether you're seeking innovative ways to heal your body, your mind, or nourish your soul, this podcast offers practical tools and wisdom to help you thrive in all areas of your life. Let's rewrite the rules of wellness together. Step into your power, reclaim your health, and discover what it means to truly thrive from the inside out. Welcome back to Women's Wellness Authority. I'm your host, Diana Ruskowski, and today's conversation is going to feel like a breath of fresh air for anyone navigating brain fog, burnout, or stubborn weight shifts, especially as we move through our 30s and 40s. So many of us have been told that feeling tired is normal, the hormones just change, or that cutting calories and pushing harder at the gym are the answers. But what if the real solution isn't about doing more? It's about understanding what your body is trying to tell you. My guest, Lindsey Clements, is a functional nutrition and lifestyle coach and a U.S. military veteran who's passionate about helping women take back control of their health through realistic, sustainable changes that fit their lives and goals. Lindsey works with women every day to decode what their bodies are communicating, identifying the missing pieces, whether it's nutrition deficiency, hormonal shifts, or lifestyle factors, and showing them how to rebuild from the inside out. In this episode, we're diving into everything from the standard blood work you should be asking for to the low-hanging fruit that can make the biggest difference in your energy, mood, and metabolism. We'll also unpack the truth about GLP-1s and weight loss drugs, how overtraining affects hormones, and why women start losing muscle mass in their 30s, but have the power to change all of that. Lindsey, thank you so much for being here today, and also thank you for your service.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. And I love in that intro, you said something that I'm like, I gotta keep this. You said I decode what's going on in women's bodies. And I feel like that's such a good use of that word. I've never used that, but you're gonna see that in my bio. I'm gonna update. I like it.
You do. You make sense of, just from us talking. I feel like you break it down and help women understand what's going on at this time in their life because, you and I talked about so many things that did work or like there weren't any problems are problems now. And so the things we used to do don't work the way
Yeah.
they used to because our bodies are ever changing. So maybe give me a sense of, like, before we get into the science of all the
Mhm.
things, I'd love for listeners to hear your story and really what led you to focus on women's health and functional wellness, because that's really the focus of your business, right?
Yeah. So I only work with women, like you mentioned. I am always somebody who's been very interested in health and nutrition and wellness, but I would say at a young age, it started for, let's just call it, like, all the wrong reasons. When I was in high school, I had friends that were dieting, so I thought I needed to lose weight. So then I went on a diet, and I can pinpoint that to kind of when a lot of my relationship with food and kind of disordered eating behavior started. And from there, it was a long journey up until I was in my 20s. I was in the military and I was still struggling with it. But that whole time, I was trying to figure out how to fix the problem, which I feel like that's kind of a common theme. I'm very much a fixer. I like to solve problems. And so there was some things that I was dealing with, throughout my teens and my early 20s, that specifically binge eating, that I really couldn't accept, as this is just how my life is. And I went to see doctors, I went to see therapists. I would tell them, hey, I'm struggling with this binge eating. I feel out of control. I feel like I'm having an out of body experience. I keep going back to the pantry over and over again. And I literally feel like I can't control myself. And nobody could tell me what was going on. I was prescribed at one point antidepressants to help with my binge eating, to help, I put in quotations, because I wasn't experiencing any symptoms of depression, but just the binge eating symptoms. And so kind of went through all these different avenues and finally realized that I just wasn't getting the answers that I was looking for. This is probably around 2015, 2016. I really started diving into trying to figure out what was going on inside my own body. So studying nutrition, studying habits, studying the brain, binge eating, all of these things. And, it turns out for me specifically, a lot of that tied back to just a history of extreme restriction. Then I got really interested in healing my relationship with food and my body, coming out of that restriction and figuring out how to lead a healthy lifestyle, but also get the physique goals that I was wanting at the time in a healthier way. Because I think that we can all talk about, yes, I want to be healthy, especially, when we're in our 30s and 40s and we have kids. We all want to be healthy, and that's the number one thing. But I think a lot of us still have those aesthetic goals as well, and that's okay. So how do we go about that in a healthy way? So that was a lot of what I did throughout my mid to late 20s before I had children, was doing that, and it was a much healthier way than I had done it before, with the right mindset, the right tools. And so then I kind of started coaching women on that just for fun. It was like a fun thing that I did while I was in the military. People were asking me, and so I was like, sure, I'll give you some help here and there. And that's really how the business started, is I just started helping people for
And the
free.
business is called Fit Her, right?
It is now called Fit Her. Yeah, I rebranded about a year ago. Prior to that, I think I just used my own name. It was like LC Nutrition and Fitness, and I decided to rebrand, just because I have a bigger vision in mind where it's not just about me. It's about women. It's about community. It's more than just nutrition and fitness. It's kind of this big, broad thing. So that is how I kind of got started. And then diving into functional nutrition, that was after I had my second child. So I had 2 babies in 2 years. The birth and stuff, this is not a birth podcast, but that was a little interesting there. But after that, the year after that, I feel like everything was pretty normal for me. I got right back into my nutrition and fitness routines. I did exactly the same things that I was teaching my clients to do at the time. I was able to feel good in my body again and get into a good habits and good nutrition routines and fitness routines. And I felt good. And by a year later, felt so good that we decided to try to have our second child, which we did. And that was a totally different story for me.
Isn't that crazy how different it is?
So different. I wasn't that much older. I was only 2 years older, but a lot of things in my life had changed. I was extremely stressed. At this time, I was working full time. I had the one baby. I was pregnant. I was running a coaching business, which was growing a lot. So I think there is a lot more pressure on me. And so stress for me is really what really threw my body out of whack. And after my second child was born, I just felt awful. Everyone doesn't feel great after they give birth, but even 3, 4, 5, 6
Yeah, it
months,
was just different. You knew it was just different.
I just felt different. And so that's when I knew I need to figure out what's going on here. That's when I learned about, getting blood work and getting these things checked. And oh, by the way, my doctor had never mentioned, hey, you should get your vitamin D levels checked. You should get your iron checked. Like, I'd never had that guidance. And so I ended up hiring my own functional nutrition coach, got my first set of labs done. And I was immediately opened up to this whole new world of all this information and all this data about my body that I had never known.
With all that background you had too, it was just like a missing piece in the puzzle.
100%. How could we not be using this for every woman to get the full picture? Because there's so many things that could be contributing to brain fog and fatigue and weight loss resistance, as we call it. How do you really know unless you're looking at the data? That was about 2022. I immediately signed up for a functional nutrition coaching course. That took me about almost a year to complete, just studying all of that, and then started implementing it with my clients and stuff. And it's really changed the game, I think, not only for me personally, but just being able to provide my clients that additional level of support.
And maybe this is a perfect transition to really talk about the basics and the blood work and empowering our listeners to understand why it's so important to ask for that and how often we should be asking for that, especially year after year, show us patterns and maybe be some flags for things that we need to address. And when I say address, it meaning actually getting to the core reason why things are happening or feeling, and not just being told you're in perimenopause, all those memes about you're just going to rage and it's just going to be like this and this and that.
That's normal. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just normal for you to
Mhm.
feel like you're going to rip somebody's head off. "Ugh, I don't want to live my life like that." Can we talk about when you say get blood work, what that means?
One thing that you said I want to point out, just because something's common, a common symptom, does not mean that it's normal. And so for anybody listening, you know your body better than anybody. You've been living with it your whole life. And so if there's anything that you take away from this discussion, it's to just feel empowered to speak out for yourself and to ask for support, because a lot of times that support is there, even from your own doctor. You just have to ask. Might not run a full blood panel, but if we ask, then maybe they'll do it. And if not, then there's other routes that we can go. So just really taking charge of that. And nobody's going to care about your health more than you do. So it's really important to take the ownership of that and just advocate for yourself, I think is so.
Yeah, you are your own advocate, really.
You have to be. You really have to be. And even if it's just simple things, right? Like a full blood panel, what I would say is something that is kind of covering all your bases, right? So we're not only looking at your CBC or your blood count, right? We're not only looking at your complete metabolic panel. Metabolic panel, for example, might have your A1C, which most people are pretty familiar with. That's a marker for diabetes. So if you see that A1C marker inching up over time, your doctor might say, hey, like, this is something that we need to watch out for. We really make sure you're eating properly, you're working out. For the most part, that's what they're going to say if they see that. But there's other markers that we can look at that give us a better picture of what's going on. So getting your fasting insulin, your fasting glucose, they give us a full picture and can almost give us an earlier picture. A lot of times your fasting insulin, for example, will be elevated far longer before your A1C is elevated. So like you mentioned, if we're getting our blood work done once a year,
Is that what you recommend?
I would say once a year if you're a generally healthy person. 6 months, I think, is plenty, definitely not more than that. If you're somebody who's working through things, if I have a client who's working through, let's say we're working on their insulin resistance and we have a specific protocol for that. I usually recommend getting those labs checked about every 12 to 16 weeks just to make sure that what we're
We're
doing.
moving in the right direction.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's what they did for me too.
If you're generally a healthy person, you just kind of want to see where things are at and get a good check. I think once a year is good. Once every 6 months if you really want that data.
Silly question, but does this blood work include an insight into what's going on in your hormones?
Yeah, the one that I would recommend where I would say we want to look at, again, the CBC, the metabolic panel, as we usually included, fasting insulin. We want to look at hormones. So things like your estradiol, so your estrogen, your progesterone, your testosterone. That's super, super important for women, especially as we are getting older, because we are naturally losing a little bit of that. And I think a lot of women kind of know that and are like, hey, I am having more brain fog, more fatigue. I have a lower libido. A lot of those things are related to low testosterone. This is one thing I want to point out as well. When you get your blood work done, what you're looking at for ranges, these are standard Western medical ranges for blood work, right? They're not optimal. So again, this is why it's important for you to advocate for your body and how you are feeling. So if something is different or off than what you have felt in the past, then whatever is happening, even if you get your blood work and they say, well, everything's in a normal range, that doesn't mean that it's optimal for you. For females, testosterone normal levels might be a range of from a 4 all the way up to like a 60. Well, if you
It's a
have a
pretty big
testosterone,
range.
that's a big range. And if your testosterone's a 4, you're probably not going to be feeling that great.
Yeah,
Let's be honest. So we want to look for something that's more of like a middle to upper of that range. And so
yeah.
that's important to understand too, is looking at your blood work and be able to, is this optimal for me? Or is it just whatever is considered normal in our country,
And
basically?
I think the functional norms are tighter because the bands for norm are wider. The functional doctors tend to tighten those so that if you don't fall in that, then that's really what we work on. I just did a 6-month program with a local functional doctor, and I had been trying to figure out what was going on with my hormones and did a blood panel. My gynecologist said, this is just a snapshot of that day. And so it really depends on where you are in your cycle. How does that factor in too when you're getting your blood work? Is there the right time of the month to get that?
No.
Because he said, all your ranges are normal. And my response to him was, I am not normal. The symptoms I'm experiencing are not normal. So something is wrong, even though you're telling me I'm within range. And then I went to the functional doctor, and sure enough, I was in range. But for the testosterone, for example, I was like a 4. So it was like in the area, but in the danger zone.
Yeah. So I'm curious, did you end up getting support through that? Or are you feeling better? I think you said it was 6 months ago.
My cortisol was completely the opposite of what it should be. We rectified that within 6 months. My insulin numbers were not great. I flipped that too. I really altered how I was eating. My hormones balanced out, but I still have the same symptoms. So I have my period for like 2 weeks every month.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and we couldn't figure out what it was. And then my program ended, so I have to go back or figure it out.
So first thing, when you're getting blood work, yes, anytime you get blood work, it is just that point in time. So whatever is happening in your body at that time, that's the data that we're going to get. I'm not against doctors at all. I think that we're doing the best that we can in the system that we have. And I think that some providers are, maybe a little bit more willing to run some of these tests than others. I think it's about finding the right provider. I think that it's important to work as a team to kind of know what you're doing for sure. So this is not to bash doctors at all. I just think that, again, it's important to know what you're asking for. I had a client who wanted to get her cortisol tested, a lot of symptoms of a dysregulated circadian rhythm and cortisol. And she asked, and they basically told her, well, your cortisol is just a point in time. It's not going to give us, it's basically a moot point to get this tested. To which I would say, no, we set ourselves up in a way that when we're getting these tests done, we do them at a specific time of day. So for example, cortisol, when you get your blood tested cortisol, we do that fasting and we do AM, right? So we do a morning cortisol. Okay, so I know as your functional health coach, what your cortisol should look like in the morning when you haven't eaten or drank caffeine. So if it's not in those ranges, so for example, if it's supposed to be from 12 to 15 is optimal, if your morning cortisol is a 5, that still gives us information. Your cortisol is really low, or maybe it's a 30. And then we can dive deeper into that and we can get more testing.
And it should be high in the morning, right?
It
Because
should be the
you're like,
heights. Yes.
yep. And mine was literally like super low and then it gassed up by the end of the night.
Yeah.
And I did a saliva test for hormones and I think cortisol. So I took it multiple times during the day.
Mhm.
So it showed that fluctuation. But to your point, you can get that snapshot in the morning. It's going to be an indication of a pattern.
And if you don't know what's going on, like you don't know it's a cortisol issue, but you're like, hey, I just want to get a full panel to see, then that gives us information for next steps. So in that sense, we would say, yeah, get your blood panel done in the morning so that when we're looking in for fasting insulin, we need you to be fasting, right? So we would want it to be an AM fasting. That way everything kind of makes sense. Usually when you get your blood work done, it will say, hey, get it done during this time in your cycle so that we can make these ranges make sense. And for people who are on birth control, that's a little bit harder. And so we just say, hey, get it done. And then we'll figure it out. There's next steps, right? So if we say your cortisol is totally high or totally low, let's get a bigger picture. Then we'll do a saliva test. I also want to make it clear that I think sometimes when you're talking about these tests, people think that they're extremely expensive and that they're going to be totally out of range for them. So for a full panel, there's nothing in it for me to say this, but my clients can get a blood panel for $200 from the company we get it from. And then if we want a cortisol test, we can get that for about $150. So it's not going to put you out thousands of dollars to get this testing done.
Yeah, because it's going to give you answers.
It's going to give you answers. And when you did the cortisol saliva test, you got that is probably a 4 point. You did it 4 times throughout the day.
Yep.
And that gives you that curve, right? So cortisol is supposed to be highest in the morning and then come down. And so for you, you saw that it rose at night, and then you can take targeted supplementation at different times of
Yep.
the
And
day.
that's what I did to reverse.
That's where it's important. So I think if you're being kind of shoved off and saying, well, it's not important because this is just a singular time in the day, it's still information and it's still important information. Well, there may be additional testing that could give us more for sure, of course. But I think that's the best place to start is a full blood panel to kind of get that initial information.
Okay, so when you're looking at a women's lab, what are some of the first clues that tell you their hormones or their metabolism are at a balance or out of whack? We mentioned a few of them, but maybe if we can just pinpoint.
The biggest things that I typically look at are thyroid function. In a lot of women, it's way more common than you may think, but a lot of women suffer from like autoimmune conditions such as Hashimoto's. So one thing that we do in our full blood panel is we don't just test your TSH, there's kind of a standard thyroid. We test everything. So your TSH, your free T3, your free T4, your TPO antibodies, which that will tell us in 2 seconds if it's autoimmune or not. That's one of the first things I look at, especially if somebody's struggling with fatigue, weight loss resistance, because your thyroid is basically your metabolism. If you have a very underactive thyroid or you're experiencing an autoimmune condition, you're going to struggle to lose weight. You're going to struggle with fatigue. You're going to struggle with sleep.
Does the thyroid affect brain fog, or is that different?
Oh, yeah. That's the other thing is there's multiple things that are kind of could be the same symptom. So like brain fog could be underactive thyroid. It could be low vitamin D. It could be low iron. It could be low testosterone. So there's a lot of different things, which is why it's important. We always say test, don't guess. Like, let's look at the data and not just throw supplements at something where we don't know what's going on. I would say big thing is thyroid. That's one of the first things I look at. The second big thing is we look for insulin resistance. Insulin resistance, for anybody who doesn't know, is if you think about diabetes, prediabetes as like a sliding scale scale. So, when you see your A1C numbers ticking up, it's like, oh, you're at risk. You're in the pre-diabetic range. And then it gets further on and now you are diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. Well, before we get there, we have insulin resistance. That's very important because studies have shown us that if you're struggling with insulin resistance or you have insulin resistance, that your BMR is lower. So your metabolism is lower. So it is more difficult for somebody who has insulin resistance to lose weight because they could be in a deficit, what they think should be a deficit for them based on the macro calculator they found online. And it's actually not, because they have insulin resistance. And so their BMR may be 300 to 500 calories less per day.
They flagged that they were concerned about that. The reason why I came in is because I gained 25 pounds in a year and I couldn't, nothing I did anything. And then plus that issue that I mentioned earlier. But with all the work that I did, that weight came off and I went back into normal ranges. But I was asking, what does it mean to be insulin resistant? So could you explain that? Like, functionally, I eat something, your body naturally is going to use insulin to help break it down, right?
Think of it as like your blood sugar regulation. What should happen when you eat is that you now have fuel and your body's supposed to tap into that fuel for energy and to use it throughout the day. A lot of times what happens, depending on how insulin resistant you are, your body is not very efficient at tapping into that fuel or those calories or that energy, and it ends up storing it for fat. Also not as efficient as like tapping into the fat that you already have to use for energy. So a lot of times like you're going to feel like if you get a lot of hunger cravings, you're irritable, your body's not really well adapted to tapping into the fuel storages that you already have. And so you're going to feel like you need that quick sugar, you're going to have blood sugar crashes, things like that are kind of telltale signs that you're experiencing some insulin resistance.
And then if it's like continuously storing in the fat, then your body almost becomes resistant to it, right? Which is where that term comes in.
The very first thing you would see typically is you would see that fasting insulin number rising before you get to a higher A1C, or your doctor says, hey, we're at risk for, pre-diabetes or diabetes. You usually see the fasting insulin number ticking up. That's why it's important. But most doctors don't get that on a panel, and it's super simple to add if you just ask them, and they probably will.
I'm like doing all of this, of course, for the listeners, but I learned so much from all my speakers. So this is really, really informative.
I'm glad. So we got thyroid, insulin resistance, and then I like to look at hormones. So then if you think about hormones, usually we just think of like estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. Yes, those are hormones, but cortisol is also a hormone. Looking at vitamin D is really important. Vitamin D, a lot of people just think it's an important vitamin, but vitamin D, once it's in your body, actually turns into a hormone and supports a lot of your other hormones, your thyroid and your adrenal.
They had me on that the whole time.
If you're really low, then that's going to affect a lot of other things like these cascading effects, right? And again, that's when it's important to look at those ranges, right? Because I think the standard range for vitamin D is, I want to say like 20 or 30 to maybe 70. If your vitamin D is at 20, you're probably struggling. It should not be that low. We really want to get that upwards of like 50, 60 is optimal for women. We look at the context of what's going on. And it's also important for me to say, like, when I work with people, I also have them do a pretty comprehensive intake form. And so I'm looking at the things that they're experiencing on a day-to-day basis and trying to connect the dots with what I'm seeing in their blood work and trying to work the low-hanging fruit first. For example, if we have a lot of fatigue and brain fog and our testosterone is low, but our vitamin D is also super low, our iron is super low, we're going to work those things first, getting vitamin D up, getting iron up, and then seeing how that affects the rest of your body. Because a lot of times you fix those things and hormone function improves, thyroid function improves, right?
Because you're just balancing out those things that were not in balance.
Exactly. So sometimes it's not really complicated. Sometimes it's a simple approach and it's just kind of getting the right things put into place and giving it time, and obviously supporting your body properly with nutrition and lifestyle and sleep and all of that is very important as well.
I'm going to go to the doctor. What are the blood tests called? Just so we can kind of leave that and put a period at the end of that sentence.
So maybe it would be easiest because you can't go in and say like, can I get a full blood panel? Because, well, what do you mean? Like, what exactly do you want? So ask for a full thyroid panel with antibodies so you can check for Hashimoto's. We're looking for a metabolic panel. They typically would do that anyways. The things that they don't typically run are fasting insulin. Vitamin D depends on your doctor, but you definitely want that. You want your cortisol and you want your hormones. They're not going to do your hormones unless you ask. If you're over 30, if you're done having kids, or even if you're not, it's important to get those things done. Even if you're not able to do something about it right then, to your point, being able to track it over time.
Yeah, to see patterns
is important.
So one of the most common things I hear from women is, I'm exhausted, I'm irritable, I've gained weight and I can't seem to lose it. but my labs are normal. So we talked about all the lab stuff, but what are low hanging fruit areas that women can look at right now or do or put into place in terms of food or exercise?
A lot of women experience this because if you think about what's happening in our 30s, where a lot of women were at like childbearing, we're having kids. A lot of women are still, they have careers, or even if not, they're taking on a lot of stress. Relationships, having kids, their career, all these things are just creating a lot of stress. I can relate to this because this is kind of, I mentioned how I got into functional nutrition is I was under a ton of stress. And even though I was doing all the right things, that threw my body out of whack. And so I think a lot of women experience this because there's more and more pressure. And I think even as social media, like in our day and age, as moms, we just feel this immense amount of pressure to do all of these things for our kids and for our families and everything. And so it kind of makes sense that we're experiencing a lot of these things because I think a lot of it does come from stress. And what happens when we're stressed? Well, we have so many things to do. We're not sleeping as much, not sleeping as well. We're not getting out and going for a walk in the sunlight. We're not eating breakfast. We're skipping meals because we're busy. We're, not even drinking water because we don't have a water bottle with us and we're going from all these places, right? And we just don't think about ourselves because we're so busy, we're just trying to do so many things. So yes, labs are important, but at a very basic level, a lot of times it's about doing less and not more.
Say that one more time because I need to hear that.
Doing less and not more. And I also need to hear this. I think we'd have like a Post-it note on my mirror that's like do less and not more. Actually, my husband literally just yesterday, I told him about something I wanted to do like with our church. And he was like, I see where you're going with this. Good idea. Like, can you handle it? Is it going to be too much? He's
Yeah,
very
is this the right time?
Yeah, exactly. Doing less and not more. But a lot of us fall into that trap of, oh my gosh, I'm gaining weight. Like, I don't feel as good. I probably need to wake up earlier. I need to eat less food. I need to work out more. And it perpetuates that problem. So, very basic. You have to try to sleep. This is really important.
How many hours?
Minimum of 7, I would say. There are studies out there that show us that if you're sleeping, I wanna say it's less than 7. It's either less than 7 or less than 6. But if you go with this, even just this sleep deficit for a couple of weeks, then your blood work is showing for people who were not insulin resistant or pre-diabetic, now they are because of the lack of sleep.
Wow. So much that goes on for the body while you're sleeping, like in terms of digestion and detoxification. And so if you're limiting that window, then your body can't do what it's naturally supposed to do. And those things build up and build up and build up and build up.
And I get it. Like, I have 2 toddlers. I don't sleep a full 8 hours every night. 7 is kind of my sweet spot. If I can get a good 7, then I'm like, we're calling it good. And there's some nights you sleep less, but I had to learn that if it was a night where my kids are up multiple times and I was sleeping 4 hours, that probably the next morning, instead of waking up early to work out, maybe I should just let myself sleep a little bit more. And that would be more beneficial for my body,
Mm.
like when pushing myself really hard in the gym that day. It's a balance, right? You have to figure out what works for your body, but sleep is really important and not just quantity, but quality. Dark room, like all these things to make sure that you're sleeping really well. We could do a whole podcast on that, but
I should actually. I have not had someone come on and talk about how important it is to sleep because it's just like such an easy thing. Oh yeah, okay, Lindsay, I'll get 7 hours, but it is, and
yeah,
it's more impactful now for the age that I am than in my 20s when I could have just worked till 11:30, 12 every night and hustled and been
yeah,
fine.
yeah. Yeah, it all catches up to you. But if you wanna read and if the listeners wanna read, there's a book that I really recommend. It's called Why We Sleep by a guy named Matthew Walker. I was introduced to this book when I was in grad school, and I was doing like a research project on stress and sleep, and I read it, and it totally changed my view on sleep because I had viewed it the same way. I was like, "Oh, just sleep is whatever. Yeah, you should sleep." But I didn't realize the effects that not sleeping, and even I'm not talking about like staying up all night. I'm talking about just mild sleep deprivation over a continued period of time, how much toll that takes on your body. And if you have kids, it's really cool to learn about how your like circadian rhythm of sleep changes as you get older and things like that too. And it's an easy read. It's not super scientific. It's a good one. Sleep, hydration. Probably like 90% of my clients, one of the first things we work on is getting them to drink more water. And within the first week, they're already feeling better. Their digestion, more energy, because most people are drinking like 30 ounces of water a day. And I really try to get people to drink at least 100, if not more. That's a big thing. If you work out a lot in the summer and you're sweating a lot, water with electrolytes to start your day is a great way to do that. Electrolytes are great for your adrenals as well. Sleep, water, steps. Don't underestimate the power of daily movement. getting outside. Obviously, you're moving, but if we're stressed, the regulation that it has on your nervous system is incredible. Again, like a lot of the things that people downplay. It's like, oh, like it's just walking, it's just sleeping, it's just drinking water. Like those things are actually really important. And if you're not doing them at all and you want to take a deep dive into your hormones, with all my clients, I'm like, we can look at your hormones, but we got to do these things because your hormones are going to magically get better with some supplement if we're not doing these
If you're
things.
not fixing some of the underlying
Exactly.
issues, right? Let's maybe talk a little bit about lifestyle and food because I think that's often where we have the most control. So, what do you notice in women you work with when it comes to daily nutrition and energy balance?
I think a lot of it, especially for moms and women, like I would say in the 30s to 40s, is under eating, skipping meals.
Under eating.
Under eating. And that's confusing, I think, especially if you're trying to lose weight and you're like, I don't even eat that much. Like, I don't know why I'm not losing weight. A lot of times when I get women into my program, one of the first things we have to do is something called a reverse diet, meaning we have to get them eating more. So if you've been eating 12, 13, 1400 calories for years, we got to get you eating more. That's enough. Like a toddler eats that much. We got to get you around 2000 calories is what most women should probably be eating at maintenance.
And then it's also the right calories, right? So it's not just like go eat a bunch of ding dongs. What are the right things that I should be feeding my body to?
Yep. So protein, most women are probably eating half the amount of protein that they need on a daily basis. Fiber is extremely important. And those things are really satiating too. So if you find that you're hungry and you're just trying to, satisfy a craving, a meal with protein and fiber, and you've got some water, I guarantee you that will satiate you for hours, right? And some good fats in there. So I think it's about making sure you're not skipping meals because that's doing more harm than it is good. And then making sure the meals are, I tell my clients like 80-20, right? We want to focus on whole foods as much as possible, but I like a good, some ice cream just as much as the next person. And I think it's important to balance out your life and to have the things that you enjoy. Definitely teach the 80-20 and really focus on whole foods, cooking from home when you can. Again, it doesn't have to be complicated. I'm not a really good cook, I'm gonna be honest. And I don't really like
Neither
cooking.
am I.
So we do a lot of ingredient meals in our family, and that's what I have done for a long time. My husband cooks a lot. And again, but it's simple. We have two toddlers, they're going to practices, and I own my own business. My husband works, he works a lot. So I'm not sitting here making a, 5-course dinner. We're ingredient meals, we're hitting the basics. Simple stuff is really what works.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of women who skip breakfast or
Yeah.
have coffee as their
Mhm.
breakfast. Every time I hear that, I'm always like, oh no. But that's something I've learned, right? And you're supposed to eat within a certain waking period or something, which is very challenging for me because I wake up at 6, but my kids are not dressed and out the door, and I'm back where I can actually eat till at least almost 2 hours past that. So
And that's hard. I think like it almost makes sense for women. Like, yeah, might as well not eat until lunch because I'm so busy and doing all these things. And oh, hey, by the way, that helps me cut calories. But I always recommend eating something, even if you're not super hungry, something in the morning, even if it's like one piece of toast with some peanut butter. And then when you get back with your kids, make a full breakfast and have some eggs, especially with some of the stuff that you had going on. I'm assuming some of it was like stress related. Your cortisol was
oh,
imbalanced.
100% stress related, yeah.
So if you are waking up in the morning when your cortisol is already supposed to be its highest, you don't eat anything, and then you drink caffeine, then think about like your cortisol is immediately going to be spiked again. It's important to like eat something. And I usually try to tell people drink like a full cup of water, wait about, 60 to 90 minutes if you can to have that first cup of coffee. Like you're not going to die, but if we're thinking about little things that you can change in
Yeah.
life,
Like,
then
still have your coffee,
just wait a little bit.
So I think a lot of women, especially in their 30s and 40s, are working out harder than ever. And you mentioned this a few times, but feeling worse. So, how does high intensity training impact our hormones or our bodies? So, those things that maybe they did in the past that worked really no longer have the same impact. Why is this? And can you kind of explain the impact it's having on the body? The different impact it's having now versus.
When you're younger. I'm not ever going to tell anybody like a blanket statement of this type of training is bad. This is bad because we are all bio individually different and different things work for different people. I will say in my experience and a lot of women that I work with, because I talk about it a lot, I work with a lot of women, working moms, stressed, have a history of overtraining. When we think about like high intensity training in relation to that, you just have to consider how much stress you're putting on your body. And again, this goes back to the doing less, not more. So a lot of times if you're in that situation, if you already have a stressful job, if you're in the thick of motherhood, if you feel like you can literally feel your cortisol rising like throughout
Yes.
the day, going and putting yourself into a high intensity workout is probably not going to be the best for your body because your body does not know how to differentiate stress. The way that it responds to stress, whether it's a mental stress, a physical stress, it's all the same
Oh,
response.
interesting. So
Yeah.
by working out, I'm putting the same amount of stress that if I was, like, bugging out at work?
Yes,
Interesting.
but stress is not a bad thing. I think stress gets a bad rep. Your body is supposed to be able to adapt to stress, but it comes when you have too much, right? And so that's when it's really important to understand how your body's feeling. I remember I used to be a big CrossFitter. I say big CrossFitter. I wasn't like amazingly good, but that was the main thing that I did prior to having kids, then probably basically up until having my second kid. And then I started realizing that when I was doing those workouts, I felt worse afterwards.
Oh, interesting.
You should never feel worse after.
Okay.
That's a big red flag if you feel worse after a workout.
To that, sometimes I do. I feel like my body hurts and then I just figure, "Oh, that's just my body, like, working things out," but that's a flag.
Yeah, I mean, I remember feeling like I would get like a little burst of energy, but then an hour later feeling I could go take a nap.
Yes, 100%.
So I really had to spend a lot of time slowing it down. That's when I switched over to basically only strength training and lifting, which a lot of women don't love because they just love to get their heart rate up. They want to go do like this fast, intense thing. They want to sweat. They want to feel like they got a really good workout. And I get that because I'm the same way. And so it's kind of a retraining of your brain to be like, listen, like maybe that's not the best thing for my body right now. Maybe when I don't have a million things going on and I'm not managing all this stuff and my total amount of stress is lower, maybe getting back into that for sure. But you have to manage the total stress, especially if it's not serving you or if you're feeling worse after a workout. I would say 3 to 4 times a week is probably optimal if you can do it. But strength training doesn't have to be long. It could be 30, 40 minutes, but we're resistance training, we're picking up some weight we're training our muscles and we take rest in between. And I think that way it's not as hard on the body and from a stress sense. It is still a stressor, right? Like everything is a stressor. Dieting is a stressor, working out is a stressor, but it's not the amount that you'd get from a high intensity workout.
So I know I'm guilty. I do not do weight training. I know I should be. And you and I talked about, especially for women in their 30s, 40s, 50s, we're actually naturally going to be losing muscle mass. So how does that affect everything from metabolism to your mood? And why is this happening? And then I guess that further emphasizes the importance of weight training.
It's about that 30-year mark, you do start to lose a certain amount of muscle mass every year. That's just kind of aging and kind of a natural thing. But if you also overlay that with the context of what we're all doing in our 30s, historically, women have done primarily cardio. They try to eat very little. You can't gain muscle when you're eating in a deficit. It's impossible. Again, we're stressed, we're not sleeping, we're not recovering, we don't give our bodies that chance to build that muscle. And so that just kind of compounds on it. And what happens when we lose muscle is, again, your muscle makes up a large part of your metabolism. So you could have somebody who, let's just say, 50 pounds for ease of math, 50 pounds of lean muscle tissue over here. And this person has 100 pounds of lean muscle tissue. The person with 100 pounds of lean muscle tissue is going to burn a lot more calories at rest. So even if they just both of them laid on the couch all day and did absolutely nothing, this person's going to have a higher BMR. So muscle is very protective as we age, and it's one of the best things that we could do to support our bodies as we age. And not just from an aesthetic or, a calorie burning perspective, but for blood sugar regulation. And think about even as we age, like when I'm 70, I want to be able to sit on the toilet by myself and things like
Yeah.
we are going to need muscle for that. We're going to need training. That's kind of why we lose the muscle. And so we have to, as women, kind of fight a little bit of an uphill battle to try to protect the muscle that we have and to not continue to lose it. And remember that every time you diet, you're losing muscle. Every time you lose weight, you're losing muscle. That's not a bad thing. It happens, right? And sometimes you need to lose that body fat, but you have to make sure that at some point you're going back to maintenance so that you can eat high proteins that you can gain that muscle again. Because like I said, you cannot gain muscle in a deficit, right? You may look like you are because you're revealing, like you're losing body fat and you're kind of revealing some of that muscle tone underneath, but you're not truly building muscle. Your body doesn't have the resources.
Let's talk about the weight loss conversations. There's a lot of different forms of that out right now, GLP-1 medications, and I think there's different forms of GLP-1s. I don't know anything about these, so let's maybe even start. And there might be a lot of listeners who have heard about them, so I think Ozempic is one, Wegovy, Mounjaro, and Can you sort of break down what these weight loss medications do for the body? Because there's positives and there's negatives, right? And this conversation isn't like these are so bad for you because so let's maybe break all that down.
Yeah, so they're a tool, and I think a lot of people that are against them probably just don't know enough about them, but, GLP-1s have been around for decades, they've been researched for decades, it's not a new thing, it's becoming very popular right now to use for weight loss because, we're in a society where we want everything right away, and so they want an easy button. If I can do this and not have to change anything else, then let's do that. So there's different types of GLP-1s. You mentioned a couple. Those are like the name brand versions. Ozempic, for example, is semaglutide. Okay. And then you also have Tirzepatide. So these are kind of like the standard names. And then you have the name brand, but you could get a semaglutide or Tirzepatide technically prescribed to you, not a name brand, if that makes sense. Really, what a GLP-1 does is a couple different things. I will say that semaglutide and Tirzepatide work slightly differently. I don't think that's super important in the context of this conversation, but at the end of the day, one thing that they do is they improve your insulin sensitivity. Okay. So they're going to help with that, which we talked about earlier. Again, this is why it's used and the FDA has approved it as a weight loss medication for people with diabetes, right? Because we're trying to improve that insulin sensitivity. So it does that. It slows down your digestion. And so you'll be feeling fuller for longer, so you won't be feeling as hungry. Those are kind of the two big things. There's a couple other things. Those are kind of I would say, like the biggest things that it does. Now, the biggest problem that I see in general with GLP-1s is people taking too much and not understanding how to implement kind of those daily habits and basics we were talking about before in conjunction with that. So for example, I met somebody a while back. It was a local like weight loss clinic. And I was just kind of chatting with them about potentially giving nutrition services to their GLP-1 clients. And the girl who was at the front desk was like, yeah, I've been on this GLP-1. It's great. I basically just have a coffee and donut every day and I'm losing weight. And I'm sitting here like, that's
So
literally
bad.
it's
Yeah.
so bad for you. You know what I mean? Like, you're basically eating nothing. You're not eating any protein. You're losing weight. Yes, you are, but you're losing tons of muscle mass. Right? Like I mentioned before, you're always going to lose muscle mass in a deficit when you lose weight, but we can preserve lean muscle tissue by eating high protein and strength training as much as possible. So, if you lose 50 pounds, maybe only 45 pounds of that is fat. But if you're somebody who's not doing any of that, maybe half of that could be muscle you're losing. I was like, "Oh, this is the problem is people taking way too much. They had absolutely no appetite. They feel like they can't eat. They feel nauseous. They feel all these things, and they lose weight very quickly, and we're really destroying our metabolism that way because we lose so much muscle. Now when we gain the weight back, we're gonna be a higher percentage of fat, and we're gonna all
Because we lost so much muscle.
yes.
Okay.
That is the big problem that I see, but if done correctly, if you're some of my clients, I had one client who, was doing all the right things. We'd working together for about a year. Nothing was budging, but she had an autoimmune condition. And so just high amounts of inflammation in her body. So she went through a company I recommended and was able to like basically microdose a GLP-1. And that one change brought down her inflammation and she was able to lose the fat that she'd been wanting to lose. And she feels great and so much better. So it's a
Yeah.
good tool. If you're implementing all of these other things, your strength training, I always recommend people on GLP-1s like track your macros, figure out how to do that, hire a coach so that you can make sure you're eating enough protein, you're eating enough food in general. Because even if you don't feel like you're hungry, you still have to be eating, you know what I
And
mean?
eating the right things, to your
And
point, not the coffee and the donut. Everybody just thinks it's okay. Like, I'm not hungry and I don't have to eat very much, but you're right. I'm not on GLP-1s, but I just notice when I don't eat right, I like how my body's feeling. And I'm like, Dinah, you're too busy, you're just grabbing things. And like, I can now feel my body is getting to a point where I'm like in a deficit area versus if I actually eat the right way.
they are a good tool, I would say, when used properly. But just like anything, there's people who use it incorrectly and people who take way too much. And if anybody listening is taking it or considering taking it, just take the very lowest dose that you possibly can and don't increase it until you need it because you may just need a very tiny bit. You may just need a microdose and not kind of the full amount that maybe your doctor or whoever is recommending. So again, know your body, listen to your body. If you take some and you're like, I feel disgusting, I have no appetite, that was probably too much.
So one of the things I love about your approach, Lindsay, is that it's never about perfection. It's really just about empowering and informing and learning to really have women reconnect with their bodies in a way that feels like doable and hopeful. So I would say, as we kind of close out this call, do you have any last thoughts that you want to share with the listeners?
I think sometimes it feels very overwhelming when you look on social media, or I don't know, maybe you've even used ChatGPT to help you come up with a plan. And it's like, just do all these things. And that's a great resource that we have today. And I love it. I use it all the time. But you have to remember that, and this is what I try to do with my clients, is meet them where they're at. Because if what we're doing is not sustainable, then you're not going to stick to it. If you've done a weight loss program before that was very extreme and you lost weight and you didn't keep the weight off, and that wasn't a good program. It's important to implement things slowly that become habits, really changing that lifestyle so that it sticks for the long term and we're not constantly in this dieting cycle. We talked about losing muscle. Like if you're constantly in a dieting cycle, you're never going to be able to gain and preserve that muscle to just support you throughout, the rest of your life. So I really would encourage you to, if you're feeling overwhelmed or you're not knowing where to start, just start with one small thing. Like it doesn't even have to be, if you've never tracked your food before, it doesn't even have to be, oh, I'm going to track my macros. It could just be, my goal for the next month is to eat a breakfast that has at least 30 grams of protein and a cup of berries. So I'm getting some fiber. Like that could be,
And see how you feel. You're going to feel better.
that could
Yeah.
really change the game for you, just that small change. Or maybe your one goal is trying to get in bed 30 minutes earlier over the next month. Little things do make a big difference. And so I think that's one thing. It's just not feeling like you have to be doing all these things. Because if you look on social media and a lot of, fitness influencers, you should be doing all these things. It's just a lot.
Yeah. And oh gosh, it is so
I'm like,
much.
I don't do all of that. I mean, I fall short every day on certain things, but that doesn't mean that I'm not continuing or that I don't the next day say, okay, let me try to do this a little bit better. I think it's really, really important to just kind of know where you're at, know what makes sense for your life, and try to fit a plan into your current lifestyle that you can actually enjoy as well. I want to be able to make cookies and eat them with my kids. I don't want to make cookies and then be like, oh, no, I can't eat that because I'm
And
on a
feel guilty about it.
yeah, so I think that that's important. And then just being your best advocate, like advocating for yourself. If you feel like something's off, then reach out to somebody, reach out to me, reach out to Diana. If you obviously have experience, maybe you can refer, just ask questions and realizing that there is support out there. You don't have to do it alone. I think a lot of women feel like they have to do it alone. Like, oh, I just got to figure this out. Like, I don't need help, and it's okay to have support and it's
Yeah.
okay to have help.
I think you need the support to keep moving forward. And both you and I, in our own personal journeys, started because we were curious and knew there was more. Rely on us, listeners, to help you with that information, because I love that, Lindsey. You don't have to do it alone. How can listeners get access to you, Lindsey?
I'm mostly on Instagram. I'm on there all the time. If you DM me, I'll usually answer you relatively quickly. I'm at Coach Lindsey Clements, Lindsey with an A. So Coach Lindsey Clement, another Instagram for just like the coaching company called Fit Her Nutrition. But if you find me on Instagram, DM me if you have any questions. I don't charge people to ask questions. You can always DM me, ask me a question, say, which lab panel should I get? I've been struggling with this. I love answering questions. To be honest, like I tell people this all the time, I would do all of this completely for free if I didn't have bills to pay. Like I literally love what I do. I love talking about it. I love helping women. So if you just have a question and you want to know what's my next step or what's the next direction I should go, just send me a message.
Wonderful. Awesome. Well, Lindsey, thank you so much for sharing your heart and expertise today. I love how you remind us that our bodies aren't broken. They're just communicating with us. So for everyone listening, I hope this episode gives you the permission to slow down, to tune in, and to take those small, consistent steps toward balance. And start with one thing: order that blood panel, lift those weights twice a week, add protein to your breakfast, or simply just rest when your body asks you to. So listeners, thank you for joining me on Women's Wellness Authority. If this conversation spoke to you, share it with a friend who might need this encouragement. And don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform or on YouTube so you never miss an episode. And if you're enjoying the show, a 5-star review means the world and helps more women find us. So until next time, stay curious, stay empowered, and most of all, stay well. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Women's Wellness Authority. If today's conversation inspired you, shifted your perspective, or sparked something within you, I'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe, leave a review, or share this episode with someone who might need it the most. Have a story of your own or something you'd like to share? I'd love to hear from you. You can connect with me on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook at Women's Wellness Authority. Please note the content shared on this podcast is for informational purposes only and is not a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always consult with a qualified healthcare provider regarding your health and wellness decisions. Until next time, stay curious, stay empowered, and most of all, stay well. Thanks, everyone.